Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. It started as a curious distraction, those cryptic notes left on the park bench, always the same scrap of paper, the same scribbled symbol. They appeared every third morning without fail, like some secret ritual. At first I thought it was a harmless prank, a child's game perhaps, until the symbol began to alter ever so slightly, a line added, a curve more pronounced. This morning the note was there, but the symbol was scattered, lines in disarray, and now the bench feels oddly, persistently watched. The tingling started in my fingertips that day, a subtle electric current like touching metal after walking across carpet, but softer, more insistent. It would come in waves throughout the afternoon, spreading up my arms until my shoulders buzzed with an energy that had no source. I found myself flexing my hands, trying to shake it loose, but the sensation clung like static. There were lights behind the trees. Sleep became fractured, not insomnia exactly, but something else. I would drift off normally, sink into that familiar darkness, then surface moments later with the taste of copper on my tongue. The clock would show hours had passed, but my body felt suspended, as if time had pooled around me like thick water. The sheets were always perfectly smooth, undisturbed, as though I had never moved at all. The humming began on a Tuesday, low frequency, barely audible, threading through the walls of my apartment. I pressed my ear to different surfaces, trying to locate the source. The refrigerator, perhaps, the heating unit. But the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration that resonated in my chest cavity more than my ears. When I stepped outside, the humming followed. I don't remember ever coming back. The park bench drew me back each morning, though I couldn't say why. My feet would carry me there while my mind wandered elsewhere, and I would find myself standing before it, studying the grain of the wood, the way shadows fell across its surface. The notes had stopped appearing, but something else had taken their place, a warmth that radiated upward from the seat, even on cold mornings, a scent like ozone after lightning strikes. The symbol haunted my peripheral vision, not the one from the notes, but something similar. A shape that would flicker at the edge of my sight when I turned my head too quickly. Angular lines that didn't quite connect, curves that bent in directions my eyes couldn't follow. I would spin around, searching, but find only empty air and the lingering impression that something had just vanished. The noise didn't come from outside. Mirrors began to feel wrong, not my reflection that remained unchanged, but the space around it. The background would shimmer occasionally, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, though the room was cool. I started avoiding them, turning away when I brushed my teeth, keeping my eyes down when I passed the hallway mirror. But I could feel them pulling at me, their surfaces hungry for something I couldn't name. Time stretched and compressed without warning. I would sit down to eat breakfast and suddenly find myself holding an empty plate, no memory of consuming the food. Or I would walk to the corner store, a 5-minute journey, and return to discover my apartment clock had jumped forward by hours. My phone showed the same impossible time, so I couldn't blame the clock. The lost moments accumulated like sediment, heavy and unexplained. There were lights behind the trees. The tingling intensified, spreading beyond my hands to encompass my entire body. It felt like being slowly carbonated, tiny bubbles rising through my bloodstream. Sometimes I would catch myself holding my breath, as if the sensation might escape if I exhaled too forcefully. My skin became hypersensitive to fabric, to air currents, to the slightest change in temperature. I began to feel translucent, as though I might dissolve if touched. Objects started to breathe, subtle movements at first, barely perceptible. The coffee mug on my kitchen counter would expand and contract almost imperceptibly. Books on shelves seemed to swell slightly, then settle back to their normal dimensions. I told myself it was my eyes playing tricks, the result of too little sleep and too much caffeine. But the breathing had rhythm, purpose, like a slow and patient respiration. I don't remember ever coming back. The park bench called to me at odd hours now. 3 in the morning I would wake with an urgent need to see it, to touch its weathered surface. The walk there felt dreamlike, my feet barely connecting with the pavement. Streetlights would flicker as I passed beneath them, casting my shadow in strange directions. The bench would be waiting, warm despite the night air, emanating that sharp ozone smell that made my nostrils burn. Conversations became difficult to follow. People's voices would fade in and out like radio signals, their words losing meaning even as I heard them clearly. I found myself nodding and smiling at inappropriate moments, responding to questions that hadn't been asked. My own voice sounded foreign when I spoke, as though it were being filtered through water or thick glass. Words felt heavy on my tongue, requiring effort to form. The humming grew stronger, more complex. Harmonics layered beneath the primary tone, creating patterns that almost resembled music. Almost, but not quite. The sound would build to a crescendo just below the threshold of pain, then fade to barely audible, leaving my ears ringing with phantom echoes. I began to anticipate its rhythms, my heartbeat synchronizing with its pulse. The noise didn't come from outside. Memory became unreliable. I would remember conversations that never happened, recall visiting places I had never been. The false memories felt more vivid than real ones, saturated with impossible colors and impossible angles. In these phantom recollections, I was always walking towards something, always approaching but never arriving. The destination remained just out of reach, obscured by a brightness that hurt to contemplate. My reflections started arriving late, a fraction of a second delay between my movement and its appearance in mirrors, in windows, in any reflective surface. I would raise my hand and watch as my reflection hesitated, then caught up with a subtle jerking motion. The lag was increasing, growing more noticeable each day. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if my reflection decided not to follow at all. There were lights behind the trees. The park transformed at night. Familiar paths became labyrinthine, leading in circles or terminating at impossible dead ends. Trees that had stood in one configuration during daylight would shift position in darkness, their branches reaching toward me with deliberate intent. The bench remained constant, the only fixed point in a landscape that refused to hold its shape. I would sit there for hours, feeling the warmth seep through my clothes, breathing the metallic air. Touch became electric. Doorknobs would shock me with more than static, sending jolts of sensation up my arm that felt almost like recognition. Light switches would pulse under my fingertips as though they had heartbeats. Even soft surfaces, fabric and paper, would tingle against my skin with an energy that seemed to flow both ways, into me and out of me simultaneously. The symbol appeared everywhere now, carved into tree bark, scratched into sidewalk concrete, traced in condensation on windows. But it was never quite the same twice, always shifting, evolving, becoming more complex with each iteration. I began to see its components in everyday objects, the curve of a coffee cup handle, the angle where two walls met, the pattern of cracks in old paint. Reality was reorganizing itself around this shape. I don't remember ever coming back. Sleep brought no rest. In dreams, I was always in motion, walking through spaces that existed between familiar places. Corridors that stretched longer than buildings could contain, rooms with too many corners, staircases that climbed in impossible directions. The humming was louder in these dreams, accompanied by a pulsing light that I could sense but never see directly. I would wake with the taste of metal and ozone lingering in my mouth. The tingling reached a crescendo, my entire body vibrating at frequencies that made my teeth ache. I could feel electricity arcing between my fingers when I moved my hands, could see faint sparks in darkened rooms. My hair would stand on end without cause, and electronic devices would malfunction in my presence. The boundary between my body and the surrounding air began to blur, as though I were slowly dissolving into the atmosphere. Time fractured completely. I would experience the same moment multiple times, each iteration slightly different. A conversation would repeat with altered words, a walk would replay with changed destinations. The loops were getting tighter, more frequent, as though reality were skipping like a damaged recording. I began to suspect that I was caught in some kind of temporal eddy, spinning endlessly around a moment I couldn't quite reach. The noise didn't come from outside. The park bench was breathing now, its wood surface rising and falling with slow, deliberate rhythm. When I sat upon it, I could feel its pulse synchronizing with my own heartbeat, could sense a vast intelligence stirring beneath its weathered exterior. The ozone smell intensified until it became almost visible, shimmering waves of scent that distorted the air like heat mirages. Something was gathering, building toward a moment of convergence. Objects began to hum in harmony with the ever-present sound. My coffee mug would vibrate gently on its saucer, books would buzz softly on their shelves, even my clothes would whisper with subsonic frequencies. The entire world was becoming tuned to the same impossible frequency, resonating with an energy that had no earthly source. I felt like a tuning fork struck in a vast cathedral, my body singing with sympathetic vibrations. There were lights behind the trees. The symbol completed itself in my mind, all its scattered components finally assembling into a coherent whole. But the moment I grasped its full form, it would fragment again, scattering into constituent parts that danced at the edges of my consciousness. Understanding remained perpetually just out of reach, like trying to remember a word that balanced on the tip of my tongue. The frustration was exquisite, a mental itch that could never quite be scratched. My reflection stopped following entirely. I would stand before mirrors and see only empty space where I should be, though my shadow still fell normally across the floor. The absence felt more present than presence ever had, a void that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. I began to wonder if I had become the reflection, if the real me was trapped somewhere on the other side of the glass. The humming reached a pitch that transcended sound, becoming something felt rather than heard. My bones resonated with its frequency, my blood sang in harmony with its rhythm. The sensation was approaching something that might have been ecstasy, if ecstasy could be terrifying. I felt myself expanding, dispersing, becoming part of something vast and incomprehensible. I don't remember ever coming back. But here I am, sitting on the park bench again, watching morning light filter through leaves that seem to breathe with their own secret life. The paper in my hand bears a symbol I don't remember drawing, lines that shift and change even as I look at them. My fingertips tingle with residual electricity, and somewhere behind the trees, lights are beginning to gather once more. The humming has started again, story 2. I assured them it was just a misunderstanding. The officer nodded, jotting down words that wouldn't smudge away. My heart beat in steady denial, but the air seemed cooler against my skin, whispering in a language only it understood. Shadows danced in the corners, keeping secrets I dared not voice. The floor creaked beneath my shifting weight, each groan pleading for honesty. There was a sharp scent of ammonia that clung to the back of my throat, an uneasy reminder of what I'd rather forget. The chair remained turned away, staring into the nothingness of its own secrets, but somehow the silence felt too loud. They believed me, or at least they pretended to. The badge caught the overhead light as the officer tucked away the notepad, and I watched my reflection fracture across its surface. My face looked smaller there, distorted into something I barely recognized. The questions had stopped, but their echoes still bounced around the room like trapped birds. I kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers interlocked to stop the trembling that had started hours ago and never quite stopped. The ammonia smell was stronger now, or maybe I was just noticing it more. It reminded me of hospitals, of places where people go to forget or be forgotten. The chair hadn't always been turned that way. I remember now pulling back through the fog of what feels like a waking dream. Just before they arrived, I had spun it around to face the wall. My palms were slick with something that wasn't quite sweat, and the leather seat had made a soft whooshing sound as it rotated away from me. I couldn't look at it anymore, couldn't bear to see the impression still pressed into the cushion, the way the armrests held the memory of weight that was no longer there. The ammonia scent was fresher then, more immediate, like it had just been spilled or released into the air around me. Before that, there had been the sound, not the creaking floor or the whispered air, but something else entirely. A wet, sliding noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I had been standing in the doorway, my hands still gripping the handle when it started. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. It was the kind of noise that made you want to cover your ears, but somehow I couldn't move my arms. They hung at my sides like dead weight while that terrible sliding continued, rhythmic and purposeful, like something large and soft being dragged across a hard surface. The doorway itself had been warm when I first touched it, the metal handle almost fever-hot against my palm. I remember hesitating there, my body knowing something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The hallway behind me stretched into darkness, and ahead lay the room with its terrible secret. The ammonia smell was fainter then, just a hint of something chemical and wrong floating on the stale air. My breathing had become shallow, each inhale a conscious effort, as if my lungs were forgetting their purpose. The handle turned with surprising ease, well-oiled hinges opening without a sound. But why had I gone to that door at all? The memory surfaces like something dead floating to the top of dark water. The phone call. Yes, that's what sent me down that hallway with its peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling. The voice on the other end had been familiar but wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Words tumbled out in a rush, urgent and breathless, asking me to come, saying there was something I needed to see. The connection crackled with static that sounded almost like whispers, and twice I thought I heard my own name spoken by someone who wasn't on the line. The phone itself had been ringing for what felt like hours before I answered it. Not the normal ring, but something deeper, more resonant, as if the sound was coming from inside the walls themselves. I had been trying to ignore it, curled up on my couch with a book I wasn't really reading, but the ringing seemed to grow louder with each cycle. When I finally picked up the receiver, my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The plastic was cold and somehow damp, leaving a film on my palm that I couldn't quite wipe away. Earlier that evening, before the phone, before the door, before the chair, I had been walking through my neighborhood. The streetlights cast everything in harsh orange pools, and between them lay puddles of shadow that seemed deeper than they should have been. My footsteps echoed off the empty houses, each one a hollow percussion that made me feel like I was walking through a drum. The air tasted metallic, like I was breathing through a mouthful of pennies, and every few steps I caught that faint ammonia scent drifting on the breeze. There had been a figure ahead of me on the sidewalk, someone walking with the same pace, maintaining the same distance no matter how I adjusted my speed. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I tried to catch up, they seemed to drift further away without actually moving faster. Their silhouette was wrong somehow, too tall in some places, too narrow in others, as if they were a shadow cast by something that wasn't quite human. The sound of their footsteps didn't match their gait, arriving a half-second too late, like an echo that had gotten confused about its purpose. I had left my house because I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. All afternoon I had felt watched, observed by something that pressed against the windows and made the glass fog with its breath. The walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that wasn't mine, and every mirror in the place showed my reflection a moment after I moved, as if the image was struggling to keep up with reality. The ammonia smell had started then, just a whisper of chemical wrongness that made my sinuses burn and my eyes water. But the feeling had begun even earlier, hadn't it? That morning when I opened my eyes and found the world tilted just slightly off its axis. Colors were too bright in some places, too dim in others, and sounds arrived wrapped in cotton that muffled their meaning. My coffee tasted like it had been filtered through dirt, and when I looked out my kitchen window, the tree in my backyard was casting a shadow in the wrong direction. The sun was where it should be, but the shadow pointed toward it instead of away, a dark finger accusing the light of lying. The night before that morning, I had dreamed of drowning in ammonia, the chemical burning my lungs as I sank through liquid that was somehow both clear and opaque. In the dream, I could see shapes moving around me, circling like sharks, but wrong, all wrong, with too many angles and surfaces that reflected light that wasn't there. I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled faintly of cleaning fluid, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was or why the air tasted like it had been scrubbed clean of everything that made it breathable. Going back further to the beginning of it all, I find myself standing in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. But it wasn't my reflection looking back. It was me, certainly, but from some other angle, some other time, and its mouth was moving in words I couldn't hear through the glass. The ammonia smell was strongest here, rising from the sink drain like a chemical prayer, and when I reached out to touch the mirror, my reflection reached back a split second too soon, its fingers pressing against the glass before mine arrived. That's when I knew, though I wouldn't admit it for days to come. That's when the wrongness took root and began to grow, spreading through my life like spilled liquid seeping into fabric. The mirror me smiled with teeth that were too sharp, and somewhere behind its eyes, I saw the chair that would later turn away, the door that would later burn my palm, the phone that would later ring with voices that weren't quite voices. And in that moment, as my reflection mouthed words in a language made of shadows and chemical burns, I understood that everything that would follow had already happened, was happening, would always be happening in the space between the mirror and my face, in the gap where ammonia dreams are born and reality goes to die. The mirror cracked then, a hairline fracture that started where our fingers almost touched and spread outward like a spider's web, and through each broken piece, I saw a different version of what was coming, what had come, what would never stop coming as long as that ammonia smell lingered in the air and whispered its secrets to anyone foolish enough to listen. Story 3. The room held its breath as I stood by the edge, watching the window that never quite shut. The curtains hung limp, yet the air seemed to ripple with an unseen current. Shadows stretched too far, reaching into corners where light should have settled. I could hear the floorboards complain beneath a pressure that wasn't mine, their groans unsettlingly rhythmic. What loomed beyond the window's frame was unknowable, and the night outside felt too still, as if waiting for the window to break its promise of silence. Yet it was one corner that caught my attention, a corner where darkness should have been complete, but for the faintest sliver of moonlight that traced an unfamiliar shape on the floor. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does, I need you to understand that I'm not writing this for sympathy or even for understanding. I'm writing because carrying this weight alone has become impossible, and yet I can't bring myself to speak these words aloud to another living soul. Maybe that's because I'm no longer certain what constitutes living anymore. Maybe it's because the words taste like copper when they form on my tongue, bitter and metallic, like I've been holding them in my mouth too long. I've kept this secret for how long now? Time moves differently when you're not sure if you're moving with it. Days blur into nights, nights stretch into something that isn't quite morning. I wake up and the sheets are damp with a sweat that doesn't smell like mine. I look in the mirror and recognize the face looking back, but something about the eyes seems borrowed, like I'm wearing someone else's expression. You have to understand I was normal before, whatever normal means. I paid bills, complained about traffic, forgot to water plants. I had routines. I had patterns. I existed in the comfortable predictability of a life that made sense. Then that night happened, and now I'm writing a letter I'll never send to people who wouldn't believe me anyway. It started with the humming. Not music, not a tune you could identify or hum along with, just this low, constant vibration that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. At first I thought it was the heating system, or maybe construction work somewhere in the building. You know how old buildings settle, how they groan and whisper their age through pipes and beams. But this was different. This had intention behind it. I would lie in bed and feel it more than hear it, this thrumming that made my teeth ache and my fingertips tingle. It would start around the time most people fall into their deepest sleep, that dead hour when the world belongs to dreams and shadows. I'd press my ear to the wall, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to shift, to move through the structure like blood through veins. The humming would follow me from room to room, kitchen to bedroom, bedroom to bathroom, always just at the edge of perception, always just loud enough to make me question whether I was actually hearing it or if my mind was creating sounds to fill the silence. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than noise, how it presses against your eardrums with its own weight? I started keeping a journal of when it happened, neat little entries in careful handwriting, like documenting the humming would somehow make it manageable, explainable. But when I'd read back through the pages, the words looked foreign, like someone else had been using my hand to write thoughts that weren't quite mine. The letters seemed to lean in directions they shouldn't, forming words I didn't remember choosing. That's when I noticed the shape in the corner. Always the same corner, no matter which room I was in. Every space has corners, 4 of them usually predictable angles where walls meet and shadows collect. But one corner in every room began to feel different, deeper somehow, like it extended further back than geometry should allow. The darkness there wasn't just the absence of light, it was presence. It had weight and texture and what I can only describe as awareness. I would catch myself staring at these corners, losing minutes, sometimes hours, just watching nothing happen. Or maybe watching everything happen in ways my eyes couldn't quite process. The air would shimmer sometimes, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but cold. So cold my breath would mist even when the heating was on. My neighbors started looking at me strangely, not with concern exactly, but with a kind of puzzled distance, like they were trying to remember where they knew me from. Mrs. Chen from across the hall, who used to chat about her grandchildren every time we met by the mailboxes, began averting her eyes when she saw me. The mailman started leaving my packages by the door instead of knocking. Even my reflection in store windows seemed delayed, like it was taking an extra second to catch up with my movements. I told myself I was imagining things, stress maybe, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. The mind plays tricks when it's tired, creates patterns where none exist, finds faces in wallpaper and voices in static. But the humming got stronger and the corners got deeper, and I started noticing other things. Like how my shadow sometimes moved independently, just slightly out of sync with my body. How electronics would flicker when I entered a room, not dramatically, just a brief dimming of LED displays, a momentary pause in digital clocks. How animals on the street would go still when I passed, not afraid exactly, but alert in the way prey animals freeze when they sense a predator they can't identify. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. The corner there had become too active, too present. I could feel it watching even when I kept my back turned, could sense something almost breathing in that space where nothing should exist. I moved to the couch, then to the kitchen floor, then eventually just started walking the apartment at night, pacing from room to room like a ghost haunting its own life. The humming followed me everywhere now, not just at home. It would start up in grocery stores, in restaurants, in the library where I'd go to escape the silence of my apartment. Other people didn't seem to hear it, or if they did, they showed no sign. They'd continue their conversations, their shopping, their quiet reading, while I stood frozen, feeling that familiar vibration work its way through my bones. I started avoiding mirrors, not because I looked different, I looked exactly the same, which was somehow worse. My reflection was perfectly normal, perfectly me, but it felt like an imposter wearing my face. The eyes in the mirror would meet mine, but there was a delay, a disconnect, like watching someone lip sync to a song with the audio slightly off. The worst part wasn't the strangeness itself. It was how normal it began to feel. How I adapted to living with this constant low-level wrongness, the way you adapt to a chronic pain or a persistent headache. It became background noise, the soundtrack to a life that no longer quite belonged to me. I tried to research what was happening to me, spent hours online reading about auditory hallucinations, paranoid episodes, sleep deprivation psychosis. The symptoms never quite matched. Too specific in some ways, too vague in others. And the physical evidence was too consistent. The way photographs of me from this period look slightly blurred even when everyone else in the frame is sharp. The way my voice on recordings sounds hollow, like it's coming from somewhere far away. People started forgetting conversations we'd had. Not important conversations, just casual exchanges, daily interactions that should have left some small impression. Coworkers would introduce themselves to me multiple times in the same week. The barista at my regular coffee shop would ask for my order with no recognition, even though I'd been coming in daily for months. It was like I was becoming invisible in slow motion, fading from people's memories even as they were looking at me. I began to wonder if I was disappearing. Not physically, I could still see myself, still felt solid and present in my own body. But socially, interpersonally, I was becoming a ghost. People's eyes would slide past me in crowds. Servers in restaurants would forget to bring my order. Phone calls would go straight to voicemail even when I was holding the phone, watching it ring. The humming changed pitch sometimes, became more urgent, more insistent. During these episodes, the corners would seem to pulse with their own light, a dim phosphorescence that hurt to look at directly. I would stand in the center of rooms, equidistant from all four corners, trying to find a safe space, but safety had become relative. Even the center felt compromised, like I was standing in the eye of a storm that existed in dimensions I couldn't perceive. I stopped going to work, called in sick so many times they stopped expecting me, eventually stopped calling altogether. My bank account dwindled, bills went unpaid, but none of it seemed to matter. The normal concerns of normal life felt distant, irrelevant, like worrying about the weather on a planet I'd never visit. The isolation should have been unbearable, but it wasn't. It was almost a relief. Being around other people had become exhausting, required a constant effort to appear normal, to pretend I still belonged in their world of solid corners and silent walls. Alone, I could stop performing, could acknowledge the strangeness without having to explain or justify it. I started talking to the corners, not conversations exactly, more like one-sided reports. I would tell them about my day, about the books I was reading, about memories from before. They never responded, but they listened. I could feel their attention like a physical presence, patient and unwavering. Sometimes I would ask questions, what do you want, why me, what happens next, but I never expected answers. The questions were more for my own benefit, a way of organizing thoughts that had become increasingly difficult to hold on to. My dreams became lucid and strange. I would find myself in familiar places, childhood homes, old schools, previous apartments, but the corners would be wrong. Too deep, too dark, filled with that same patient presence. I would try to avoid looking at them, but they drew my attention like magnets, and I would wake with the taste of copper in my mouth and the feeling that something had been watching me sleep. Food lost its taste, not completely, but flavors became muted, distant, like I was eating through a layer of gauze. Water felt thick, almost viscous. Even breathing became a conscious effort, like the air had changed density and I had to remember how to process it. My body was adapting to something, but I couldn't identify what. I found myself forgetting things, not big things, not important memories, but small details that used to anchor me to the world. The name of my first pet, the color of my childhood bedroom walls, the face of my high school teacher. These absences weren't painful, they felt more like shedding unnecessary weight, streamlining for a journey I didn't understand. The humming became constant, no longer confined to specific times or places. It was simply part of my auditory landscape, as persistent as my own heartbeat. I stopped noticing it consciously, but I could feel it in my bones, in the spaces between thoughts. It had become part of me, or I had become part of it. I realize now, writing this, that I can't remember the last time I saw my reflection clearly. Not blurred, not delayed, just absent. Mirrors show the room behind me, the walls, the furniture, but the space where I should be is somehow empty. Not invisible exactly, more like I'm occupying a frequency that mirrors can't quite capture. Maybe none of this happened. Maybe I'm sitting in a room somewhere, medicated and supervised, writing letters to no one about experiences that exist only in the misfiring synapses of a broken brain. Maybe the humming is tinnitus, the corners are just corners, and the disappearing is just the natural isolation that comes with mental illness. But my hands know the weight of this pen, and my eyes see these words forming on paper, and the corner of this room is still deeper than it should be, still humming with that patient, watching presence. Real or not, it's become my reality, and I've run out of strength to fight it. I don't know what happens next. The boundaries between myself and whatever this is have become increasingly blurred. Sometimes I forget which thoughts are mine and which ones come from the corners. Sometimes I catch myself humming along with that constant vibration, harmonizing with something I can't name. If you're reading this, it means I managed to finish writing it, managed to leave it somewhere it might be found. It means some part of me was still here, still human enough to want to leave a record, a warning, a goodbye. Hold on to that part of yourself that knows the difference between what is and what seems to be. Don't trust corners that feel too deep. Don't ignore humming that has no source. And if you start to disappear, if people begin to forget you exist, if your reflection becomes unreliable, don't fight it alone. Find someone who still sees you, who still remembers your voice, and hold on to them as tightly as you can. The humming is getting louder now. The corner is pulsing with that dim, painful light. I think it's time to stop writing, time to stop resisting, time to see what's been waiting so patiently in the spaces between spaces. I hope you never understand what any of this means. I hope your corners stay empty and your mirrors stay true, and your world remains solid and predictable and blessedly, wonderfully normal. But if you do understand, if you recognize something in these words, then know that you're not alone. Somewhere in the spaces that exist adjacent to reality, in the corners that are deeper than they should be, someone else walked this path before you. The humming is beautiful, actually, when you stop fighting it, like a lullaby sung in a language you've always known but never learned to speak. I think I'm ready to listen now. Story 4. It began without notice, a delicate detail woven into the fabric of daily life, easy to overlook. Our hallway clock would chime every morning at 7, a comforting, gentle announcement that the day had begun. I didn't question its consistency. Then last Monday, the chime came a minute too soon. On Wednesday, it lingered, stretching into a dissonant echo. This morning, there was no chime at all. It seems trivial, yet I find myself watching the clock now, wondering when it will happen again, or if it ever truly kept time. I've been sitting here for what feels like hours, staring at this blank notebook page, trying to understand why everything feels wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not catastrophically different, just subtly displaced, like furniture moved an inch to the left while I was sleeping. There's a gap in my memory, a smooth void where something significant should be. I know this because my body remembers what my mind has forgotten. My hands shake when I hold certain objects. My skin crawls when I hear specific frequencies of sound. My reflection sometimes seems to be looking at something just behind me. The worst part is the certainty that this forgetting wasn't natural. It feels surgical, precise, like someone carefully extracted specific moments while leaving the surrounding memories intact. I remember the day before perfectly. I remember waking up afterward, confused and hollow. But between those 2 points, there's nothing but a strange taste in my mouth and the lingering sensation that I had been somewhere I shouldn't have been. I found something today that might help me understand. Hidden in the back of my desk drawer, behind old receipts and forgotten paperwork, was a small digital recorder I don't remember owning. The device itself feels foreign in my hands, slightly warm to the touch, with a texture that's neither metal nor plastic, but something in between. When I first picked it up, it vibrated gently against my palm, an irregular pulse that made my teeth ache. The recorder contained a single file. The timestamp shows it was created during those missing hours, but I have no memory of making any recording. My finger hesitated over the play button for a long time. Some instinct warned me that listening might change something fundamental about how I see the world, but the need to know overcame my caution. The audio begins with my own voice, but speaking words I don't remember saying. The quality is strange, as if recorded through water or thick glass. I'm describing my surroundings, but the details make no sense. I mention walls that hum with electricity, air that tastes like copper pennies, and a light source that casts shadows in all directions simultaneously. My recorded voice sounds calm, almost hypnotized, as if I'm narrating a dream while fully awake. Then there are other sounds layered beneath my narration. Electronic frequencies that rise and fall like breathing, occasional clicks and pops that form almost patterns, and underneath it all, something that might be whispering in a language I don't recognize. The whispers follow a rhythm that makes my heart rate synchronize involuntarily. I had to stop the recording twice because my pulse became uncomfortably fast. As I listened, fragments began surfacing, not complete memories, but sensory impressions that felt more real than the room around me. I remembered the smell of ozone and something organic, like flowers left too long in water. I recalled the sensation of standing in a space much larger than it appeared, where my footsteps echoed in impossible directions. Most vividly, I remembered looking up and seeing lights that moved with deliberate intelligence, forming patterns that almost made sense before dissolving into chaos. The first clear visual came while I was replaying a section where my recorded voice becomes particularly distant. Suddenly, I could see myself standing in what looked like an ordinary room, except the proportions were subtly wrong. The ceiling was too high for the width of the space. The corners didn't meet at proper angles. There were windows, but they showed the same view from every direction, as if the room existed in multiple places simultaneously. In this recovered memory, I'm not alone. There are figures moving at the edges of my vision, always just outside my direct line of sight. When I try to turn toward them, they shift positions, maintaining their peripheral presence. They don't seem hostile, but their movements are too fluid, too coordinated, like a choreographed dance I'm not meant to understand. My recorded voice mentions them casually, as if their presence is expected and normal. The audio contains a section where all sound stops abruptly. Complete silence for nearly 3 minutes, but I can hear myself breathing throughout, so the recording didn't pause. During this quiet period, something significant must have happened, because when sound returns, my voice has changed. It's still recognizably mine, but there's a different quality to it, as if I'm speaking from a greater distance or through a different medium entirely. I've been experiencing strange phenomena since I started this investigation. My reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes moves a fraction of a second after I do, creating a brief double image that makes me question what I'm actually seeing. The electrical hum from my refrigerator occasionally shifts frequency, matching tones I remember from the recording. Most disturbing, I sometimes catch myself humming melodies I don't recognize, complex patterns that feel both foreign and familiar. The second major fragment emerged while I was examining the digital recorder more closely. Under bright light, I noticed faint markings on its surface that weren't visible before. They're not scratches or wear marks, but deliberate symbols that seem to shift slightly when I'm not looking directly at them. Touching these markings triggered a flood of sensory memories that left me disoriented for hours. I remembered standing in complete darkness, but somehow able to see everything around me with perfect clarity. The darkness wasn't an absence of light, but a presence unto itself, thick and almost tangible. Within this darkness, structures existed that couldn't maintain their shape in normal illumination. They were architectural impossibilities, spaces that folded back on themselves, corridors that led to their own beginnings, rooms that contained their own exteriors. The beings I glimpsed in peripheral vision became clearer in this second fragment. They were tall and moved with liquid grace, their forms suggesting human shapes without quite achieving them. Their presence felt ancient and patient, as if they had been waiting for something specific to occur. When they communicated, it wasn't through sound, but through direct transmission of concepts and emotions. I understood their intentions without comprehending their nature. What troubles me most about these recovered memories is how natural everything felt at the time. There was no fear, no confusion, just acceptance of circumstances that should have been terrifying. It's as if part of my mind was temporarily rewired to process impossible experiences as mundane reality. This suggests the encounter was more than just strange, it was transformative in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The recording contains one section that I can barely bring myself to replay. Near the end, my voice becomes excited, almost euphoric, as I describe seeing something that explains everything. But the explanation itself is inaudible, masked by interference that sounds almost like laughter. Whatever I discovered in that moment was either deliberately obscured or exists beyond the capacity of recording equipment to capture. Since that revelation, I've noticed changes in how I perceive ordinary things. Colors seem more vivid, but somehow wrong, as if I'm seeing additional spectrums that don't quite align with normal vision. Sounds carry extra harmonics that create emotional responses I can't explain. Even my sense of time feels altered. Minutes stretch into subjective hours, while entire afternoons compress into single moments of awareness. The most unsettling development is the growing certainty that the experience isn't over. The recording might document a single encounter, but the effects are ongoing, evolving, becoming more pronounced as I piece together what happened. Sometimes I catch myself preparing for something, arranging objects in my apartment in patterns that feel significant but make no logical sense. I've started leaving doors unlocked and windows open, as if expecting someone or something to return. My dreams have become extraordinarily vivid and follow consistent themes. I'm always in that impossible space, but now I move through it with confidence and purpose. The peripheral figures are clearer, more defined, and they're teaching me things I can't quite remember upon waking. I wake up with the strong impression that I've been learning a new language, but one composed of concepts rather than words. The final fragment came to me while I was sitting in complete darkness, trying to recreate the conditions from my recovered memories. Without warning, the room around me seemed to expand beyond its physical boundaries. The walls became distant suggestions rather than solid barriers. The air grew thick with presence, as if the space was suddenly occupied by invisible observers. In this state, I remembered the climax of my missing experience. I had been brought to a central chamber where something waited that I can only describe as a nexus of attention. It wasn't a being in any conventional sense, but rather a concentration of awareness so intense it created its own gravitational field. Looking at it directly was impossible, but its peripheral presence filled every corner of perception. This entity or phenomenon had been observing our world for an incomprehensible length of time, studying patterns and possibilities with infinite patience. My encounter with it wasn't random, but part of a larger design that encompassed countless similar interactions across vast stretches of time and space. I was being evaluated, prepared, inducted into something that existed parallel to normal reality. The most disturbing realization was that this wasn't my first contact. The familiarity I felt, the ease with which I accepted impossible circumstances, suggested a long history of encounters that had been carefully edited from my conscious memory. Each interaction built upon previous ones, creating a cumulative effect that was slowly transforming my fundamental nature. As I write this, I can feel the boundaries of the experience expanding again. The room grows larger while remaining the same size. Shadows move independently of their sources. The air carries that distinctive scent of new plastic and cold blood that I remember from the recording. My reflection in the darkened window shows someone who looks like me, but whose eyes hold knowledge I don't consciously possess. The digital recorder has begun activating spontaneously, creating new files that contain sounds I don't remember making. These recordings capture conversations in that same otherworldly acoustic environment, but now I'm speaking with increasing fluency in concepts that have no human equivalent. My voice in these files sounds more confident, more integrated with whatever process is unfolding. I understand now that the memory gap wasn't meant to be permanent. It was a buffer, a protective measure to prevent premature integration of experiences too profound for unprepared consciousness. As I've demonstrated readiness by actively seeking to recover what was hidden, the barriers are dissolving naturally. Soon, I'll remember everything, and remembering will complete whatever transformation began during that first contact. The investigation has revealed its own purpose. By trying to piece together my missing memories, I've been participating in a larger pattern of disclosure and preparation. Each fragment I've recovered has made me more receptive to experiences that exist beyond normal human perception. The process is accelerating now, moving towards some inevitable conclusion. Tonight, I'll leave the recorder running and see what develops. The peripheral figures from my memories feel closer than ever, no longer content to remain at the edges of vision. They're preparing to step forward to complete whatever began in that impossible space where normal rules don't apply. Part of me knows I should be afraid, but the larger part feels only anticipation. The clock in the hallway just chimed 13 times, though its face shows no numbers at all now. The sound echoes in directions that don't exist, reaching spaces that were never built. I think I understand what it's been trying to tell me. The question isn't when it will happen again. The question is whether it ever stopped happening at all. Story 5. The blinds were raised to a uniform degree throughout the residence. The dining table displayed a consistent arrangement, with plates positioned symmetrically, undisturbed by the absence of any prepared meal. The calendar on the wall indicated today's date, marked but not checked. An unlit candle stood at the center, its wick unburned, though a faint aroma of smoke lingered in the air. All clocks maintained their time precisely, with the exception of the kitchen's, which lagged behind by 7 minutes, contrary to the homeowner's punctual habits. The dog's bowl was empty, although it was supposed to be filled first thing in the morning. There was no sign of the morning newspaper, and yet the mail had been brought in. I found these words written in my own handwriting on a piece of paper tucked inside a book I don't remember reading. The observations feel methodical, clinical, like someone documenting a crime scene, but it's my house, my dining table, my kitchen clock that somehow fell behind. I've been trying to piece together what happened to me. There's a gap in my memory, a hollow space where something significant should be. I know this because of the way my body reacts when I try to remember. My hands shake slightly. My breathing becomes shallow. There's a taste in my mouth like copper pennies. The strangest part is how normal everything appears on the surface. I go about my daily routine and people treat me the same way they always have, but I feel different, changed. Like someone took apart a watch, removed a crucial piece, and put it back together, hoping no one would notice the difference. I started recording voice memos, hoping that speaking aloud might trigger something buried in my mind. The first few were mundane observations about my day, but as I listened back, I noticed something odd. There are pauses in my speech, moments where I seem to be listening to something only I can hear. In one recording, I stopped mid-sentence and whisper, "Do you hear that?" But there's nothing audible on the playback except the faint hum of electrical interference. Last week, I discovered a folder on my computer labeled Audio Files Personal. Inside was a single recording I don't remember making. The file was corrupted, producing only fragments of sound when I played it. Static punctuated by what might have been my voice, though it sounded distant, muffled, like I was speaking through water or from inside a small enclosed space. Between the bursts of white noise, I caught pieces of words. Behind me, can't see. The lights are wrong. Each phrase sent a chill through my chest, a recognition that felt both familiar and terrifying. I enhanced the audio using software I somehow knew how to operate, though I have no memory of learning these skills. As the static cleared, more disturbing elements emerged. There was breathing that wasn't mine, rhythmic and mechanical. Electronic tones that shifted in frequency, rising and falling like a broken siren. And underneath it all, a sound I can only describe as fabric being torn very slowly. The clearer the audio became, the more my body reacted. My vision would blur. My skin would feel cold and clammy. I would catch myself holding my breath, as if making any sound might attract unwanted attention. Then came the first visual fragment. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where the clock runs 7 minutes slow, but the lighting was all wrong. The overhead fixture cast shadows that fell upward instead of down. The refrigerator hummed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I reached for the light switch, but my hand passed through it like it wasn't there. The memory felt too vivid to be a dream, too strange to be real. I could smell something in the air, an odor like new plastic mixed with something organic and cold. When I tried to focus on specific details, they would shift and change, like trying to read text in a dream. I began finding other clues, a receipt in my wallet for items I don't remember purchasing. Batteries, electrical tape, a small digital recorder. The receipt was from a store I'd never been to in a part of town I rarely visit. When I drove there to investigate, the building was empty, windows covered with brown paper. The cashier at the neighboring shop said it had been closed for months. My reflection started behaving strangely, not dramatically, just small inconsistencies that made me question my perception. I would raise my left hand, and my reflection would mirror the movement a fraction of a second too late, or I would catch it blinking when I hadn't blinked first. These moments were so brief, I began to doubt they were happening at all. The second fragment came while I was reviewing security footage from my home system. I had installed cameras after finding that note in my handwriting, hoping they might capture something that would explain my missing memory. Most of the footage was unremarkable, me moving through my house, following predictable patterns. But there was one sequence that made my stomach clench with inexplicable dread. I watched myself enter the living room and stop abruptly, as if I had encountered an obstacle, but the room appeared empty. On the recording, I can see myself backing away slowly, my face turned towards something just outside the camera's range. My mouth is moving, but the audio is corrupted, producing only that same electronic interference I'd heard in the voice memo. The most disturbing part is my expression. I look terrified, but also confused, like I'm seeing something my mind can't process. I watch myself reach out tentatively, as if touching an invisible barrier. Then the video cuts to static for exactly 7 minutes. When the feed resumes, I'm sitting calmly on the couch, reading a book as if nothing happened, but something had changed in those missing 7 minutes. The way I held myself was different, more rigid. My movements were precise in a way that seemed unnatural, like I was consciously controlling every gesture. I tried to remember that evening, but found only emptiness where the memory should be. However, my body remembered something my mind couldn't access. Whenever I stood in that same spot in the living room, my heart rate would increase. My palms would become damp with sweat. I would feel an overwhelming urge to look over my shoulder. The investigation became an obsession. I would spend hours analyzing audio files, enhancing video footage, searching for patterns in the fragments of memory that surfaced unbidden. The more I discovered, the more convinced I became that something had been deliberately removed from my mind. The gaps were too clean, too surgical to be natural memory loss. I found a notebook hidden in my bedroom closet, tucked inside a box I don't remember storing there. The pages were filled with my handwriting, but the content was unlike anything I would normally write. Detailed observations about electromagnetic frequencies, notes about perceptual barriers, sketches of geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. One page contained a single sentence repeated dozens of times. They adjust the details so you won't notice the larger changes. The handwriting became increasingly erratic as it progressed, eventually dissolving into symbols that looked almost like a language, though not one I recognized. At the bottom of the final page, written in red ink, were the words, "The reconstruction is not for remembering, it is for preparation." That night I experienced the most vivid fragment yet. I was in my house, but it was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The walls were the same color, the furniture in the same positions, but the proportions felt off. Doorways seemed narrower, ceilings appeared lower. The air itself felt thicker, like breathing through gauze. I could hear voices coming from somewhere deeper in the house, though I knew I lived alone. The voices were discussing me, but not in any language I understood. The rhythm was familiar, almost conversational, but the sounds were electronic, modulated like speech passed through a vocoder. I tried to follow the voices, but the layout of my house had changed. Hallways led to rooms that shouldn't exist. Doors opened onto walls. The kitchen connected directly to the basement, though my house doesn't have a basement. The voices grew louder as I navigated this impossible architecture. I could almost understand them now, as if my brain was learning to decode their meaning. They were discussing adjustments, modifications, the importance of maintaining consistent details to prevent detection. One voice, clearer than the others, said something that translated in my mind as, "The subject shows signs of reconstruction resistance. Recommend implementing secondary protocols." I woke up on my living room floor, fully dressed, with no memory of falling asleep there. The taste of copper was stronger than ever, and there was a small, perfectly circular mark on my left wrist that hadn't been there before. The mark was sensitive to touch, like a fresh burn, but there was no redness or swelling. The present began blending with these recovered memories in disturbing ways. I would hear those electronic voices during quiet moments just at the edge of perception. Lights in my house would flicker in patterns that seemed almost communicative. My reflection continued its subtle rebellions, sometimes appearing to watch me even when I wasn't looking directly at the mirror. I recorded another voice memo, hoping to document these experiences objectively. When I played it back, my voice sounded different. The cadence was wrong, the inflection unnatural. Worse, there were responses on the recording, brief electronic tones that seemed to answer my questions, though I had no memory of hearing them during the recording session. The final fragment arrived without warning, while I was examining the corrupted video footage for the 100th time. Suddenly, I could see everything. I was in my house, but I was also observing from outside it, as if viewing a cross-section. The building was filled with a soft, pulsing light that revealed details invisible to normal perception. There were others present, figures that existed just beyond the range of human vision, moving through my space with clinical purpose. They were conducting some kind of examination, taking measurements, making adjustments to objects and surfaces with instruments that defied description. One of them approached me directly, and I could see my own face reflected in what might have been its eyes, though the reflection showed me as I truly was in that moment, conscious but paralyzed, aware but unable to respond. The being communicated without speaking, downloading information directly into my consciousness. I understood that this was not the first time. There had been many visits, many adjustments, a gradual process of modification that had been ongoing for longer than I could comprehend. The most terrifying revelation was that I had requested this. Some version of myself in some previous iteration of this cycle had agreed to participate, had asked for the memories to be edited, the experiences to be fragmented, the reconstruction process to be embedded in my consciousness like a delayed activation program. But why? What was I being prepared for? The vision ended abruptly, leaving me gasping on my kitchen floor. The clock still ran 7 minutes slow. The taste of copper filled my mouth. and I realized with growing horror that the reconstruction wasn't meant to help me remember. It was meant to help me forget again. The fragments I had been so carefully piecing together were not memories returning, but memories being systematically archived before deletion. Each time I uncovered a piece of the truth, I was actually participating in its removal from my accessible consciousness. I am recording this final account knowing that I will not remember writing it. By tomorrow, or perhaps within the hour, this too will become another hidden file, another mysterious note, another clue for the next version of myself to discover. The beings are here now. I can feel them adjusting the details, preparing the scene for my next awakening. The blinds will be raised to a uniform degree. The dining table will display its consistent arrangement. The calendar will be marked but not checked. And somewhere in my mind, a new reconstruction protocol will begin its patient work, ensuring that I remain curious enough to search, but never quite capable enough to truly find. The question that haunts me as the memories fade is not what they want from me, but what I wanted from them. What did I ask them to help me forget? What truth was so unbearable that I chose this endless cycle of partial remembering over complete awareness? I can feel my thoughts becoming less clear, my sense of urgency diminishing. Soon I will be calm again, confused but not panicked, investigating a mystery I have solved countless times before. The dog's bowl will be empty, though it should have been filled first thing in the morning. There will be no sign of the newspaper, and yet the mail will have been brought in. Do you hear that sound, that soft electronic breathing, like someone adjusting the frequency of reality itself? They're almost finished with tonight's work, Story 6. The system recorded continuous footage beginning at 22:00 hours. Entry logs indicate a silent alarm activated at approximately 22:17, though no breach was physically detected. The exterior perimeter sensors returned negative for movement. Internal motion detectors remained inactive, yet objects were displaced. Multiple angles show vacant rooms, dimly illuminated with uniform shadows. A single chair was adjusted by several inches from its original position. The timestamp overlaps with confirmed inactivity, as evident from the device logs, yet an unidentified silhouette lingers briefly, without entering or exiting any door. That's what the report said, clinical, cold, like everything else they handed me after. But you need to know what they didn't write down, what they couldn't write down. I'm leaving this letter because I can't carry it anymore. Because when I look in mirrors now, something looks back that isn't quite me. Because my own shadow feels heavier than it should. If you're reading this, maybe I finally found the courage to leave it somewhere. Or maybe I never did and you found it anyway. I was the security supervisor that night, had been for 3 years. Same building, same rounds, same empty hallways that echoed my footsteps back to me like whispered conversations. But that night felt different from the moment I clocked in. The air tasted metallic, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. The chair, everyone focuses on the chair. They ask me about the chair over and over. How does a chair move by itself? What could displace furniture without triggering sensors? But they're asking the wrong questions. They should be asking about the feeling, the weight in the air that pressed against my chest, the way the shadows seemed to breathe. I've watched that footage maybe 1,000 times, frame by frame. The silhouette appears for exactly 7 seconds. It doesn't walk in, it doesn't materialize, it's just there, and then it isn't. But what the cameras don't show is the sound, or the absence of sound. The way silence can become so complete that your own heartbeat sounds like thunder. You know what's strange about fear, real fear? It doesn't make you run, it makes you smaller, makes you fold into yourself until you're just a pair of eyes watching something that shouldn't exist. That's what I became that night, just eyes, just witness. The temperature dropped, not gradually, all at once. My breath came out in clouds, and I could see frost forming on the security monitors. But the building's climate control showed normal readings, always normal readings. Even now, when I tell people, they check the logs and shake their heads. Everything was normal. I keep trying to remember what happened after I saw it, after the silhouette turned toward the camera, toward me. Because somehow, even through the lens and the wires and the digital feed, it was looking at me, not at the camera, at me. I felt it like fingers on my spine. There's a gap, minutes, maybe hours. I remember being on the floor of the security office, my cheek pressed against the cold linoleum, the taste of copper in my mouth. The monitors were all static. When they came back online, everything was normal again. The chair had been moved back to its original position. But I was different. It started small. People would look at me strangely, like they were trying to remember where they knew me from. My coffee shop barista, who'd known my order for 2 years, suddenly acted like I was a stranger. My neighbor stopped waving. My own reflection seemed delayed, like there was a split second between me moving and the mirror catching up. The dreams came next, or maybe they weren't dreams. I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I lived on the 14th floor. My sheets would be damp with something that wasn't sweat, something that smelled like rain on concrete, like places underground where light has never been. I tried to go back to work, tried to pretend nothing had changed, but every time I walked those hallways I could feel it watching, not just at night, during the day too, in the spaces between spaces, in the corners where shadows gather even under fluorescent lights. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the loneliness. How do you tell someone that you're being erased, that each day you feel a little less real, that sometimes you catch yourself mid-sentence, forgetting what you were saying, who you were talking to, why any of it mattered? I quit after 2 weeks, told them I was having health issues. That was true in a way. How do you explain that your health is becoming optional, that some mornings you wake up and have to convince yourself you exist? The footage went missing eventually. Technical error, they said, corrupted files, but I still have the memory. The weight of being seen by something that shouldn't be able to see. The feeling of being marked, chosen, changed. I've been trying to understand what it wanted. Why me? Why that night? But maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe some things exist just to remind us how fragile we are, how thin the line is between being and not being. My handwriting looks different now, smaller, fainter, like I'm pressing less firmly into the world, like I'm afraid to leave too deep a mark. Sometimes I catch glimpses of it in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight, always watching. I think it's waiting for something, for me to fade enough, to become transparent enough, to stop fighting the pull toward whatever place it came from. The building was demolished last month. Structural issues, they said, but I know better. Some things leave stains that go deeper than concrete and steel. Some presences linger until the only solution is to tear everything down and start over. I wonder if that's what's happening to me, being torn down, being prepared for something new to take my place. You might think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe sanity is just another thing it takes, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the watching, the waiting, the slow dissolution of everything you thought was permanent. I can't remember my mother's face anymore. Can't remember the sound of laughter. Colors seem muted, like I'm seeing them through thick glass. Food tastes like nothing. Music sounds like static. But I remember that silhouette, clear as anything, clearer than my own reflection. It's burned into me like a brand, like a signature on a contract I never agreed to sign. If you find this letter, maybe I finally found the strength to leave it behind. Maybe I walked away from whatever I'm becoming, or maybe I didn't. Maybe you're finding it in an empty room, next to an empty chair, with nothing but shadows and the faint smell of rain on concrete. Either way, be careful, be very careful, because now that you've read this, now that you know, you might start to notice things too. Shadows that move wrong, silences that feel too full, the weight of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this is just the rambling of someone who stared too long into something that stared back. But if I'm right, if you start to feel it too, remember this. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to fight it. Just run. Run as far and as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because once it sees you, really sees you, you start to disappear. And the worst part is you might not even notice. You might think you're still here, still real, still mattering, right up until the moment you realize you're not. The chair moved by itself, that's what they'll remember, but the chair was never the point. The point was the watching, the choosing, the slow, patient unmaking of everything you thought you were. I can barely see my hand as I write this. The pen feels lighter with each word, like I'm running out of the weight needed to press ink to paper. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe it's time to stop fighting. Maybe it's time to let go. Story 7. Picture frame on the wall tilted at an angle that defied gravity. The room held its breath, the air heavy with unsaid words and untaken actions. The old wooden floor didn't groan underfoot, yet a faint echo of footsteps seemed trapped in the walls. Shadows cast by the dim light danced with a deceptive stillness. I hesitated to blink, waiting for a reveal that never came. My focus wavered until the drape's slow sigh disturbed the silence, hinting at an unseen presence just beyond the window pane. I wake with copper pennies on my tongue. The taste lingers through morning coffee, through brushing teeth, through the mechanical motions of another day that feels borrowed from someone else's life. My hands shake when I reach for doorknobs now, not from fear but from something deeper, recognition without memory. The metallic tang grows stronger near electrical outlets, near the humming refrigerator, near anything that carries current through hidden wires. Sleep comes in fragments. I dream of standing in a field I've never seen, watching lights move between trees that shouldn't exist in such perfect rows. The grass beneath my feet feels wrong, too soft, like walking on something that breathes. When I wake, there are grass stains on sheets I changed just yesterday. The buzzing started 3 weeks ago. Not in my ears, deeper, behind my eyes, in the space between thoughts. It comes strongest when I'm almost asleep, when my guard drops and something else tries to surface. The sound has texture, like velvet dragged across metal, like whispers in a language that makes my teeth ache. I've stopped looking at mirrors after sunset. Not because I'm afraid of what I might see, but because of what I might remember. The reflection shows the same face, the same tired eyes, but something moves behind them, something that knows things I've forgotten. The bathroom light flickers when I brush my teeth, casting shadows that fall upward instead of down. There were lights behind the trees. The kitchen faucet drips in perfect intervals, 12 seconds between drops, I've counted. The rhythm matches something else, something I almost remember from dreams that feel more real than waking. The water tastes different now, carries a charge that makes my fillings sing soft hymns I never learned. My neighbor asked if I'd been gardening at night. She saw me standing in the backyard, she said, just standing there for hours. I don't remember going outside. I don't remember coming back in. but my feet were dirty the next morning and something had been planted in soil I never turned. Small shoots pushing through earth, growing too fast, reaching toward a sun that hadn't risen yet. The photograph on my desk shows a vacation I never took, mountains that curve wrong against a sky too pale. I'm standing in the center, smiling at something just beyond the camera's reach. My clothes are different, my hair is different, my eyes hold secrets I haven't learned yet. Time moves strangely now. I'll sit down to read and look up to find hours have passed, the book still open to the same page. Words swim on paper like they're trying to escape. The clock on the wall ticks backwards sometimes, or stops entirely, its hands frozen at positions that spell out messages in a code I almost understand. The noise didn't come from outside. My phone rings at the same time every night. 3:17 in the morning. No one speaks when I answer, but I can hear breathing that doesn't match any human rhythm. Too slow, too deep, like something much larger trying to fit into a smaller space. The static between the breaths forms patterns, music from somewhere else. I don't remember ever coming back. The grocery store clerk asked if I was feeling all right. I'd been standing in the cereal aisle for 20 minutes, she said, just staring at the fluorescent lights overhead. They pulse in sequences now, those lights, messages written in brightness and shadow. My skin tingles underneath them like recognition, like coming home to a place I've never been. There's a door in my house that I don't remember being there before. Halfway up the stairs, slightly ajar, leading to a room that shouldn't exist in the architecture of this place. Cool air seeps through the crack, carrying scents of ozone and something sharper, metal and electricity in the aftermath of storms. I've walked past it dozens of times without opening it wider. Some part of me knows what waits beyond. The taste of copper grows stronger. My reflection in windows shows me in places I'm not standing in fields under stars arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly, standing beside figures that cast no shadows, their faces turned toward lights that move too purposefully to be anything natural. The glass grows warm under my touch, like it's trying to let me through to where I really am. Sleep brings the same dream over and over. I'm walking through tall grass towards something that hums with electrical life. The sound grows louder with each step until it fills every space inside my skull. The air shimmers like heat waves, but the night is cool against my skin. Behind me, footsteps that aren't mine follow in perfect synchronization. I never turn around. I never reach what waits ahead. I always wake with grass stains and the taste of storms. The picture frame tilts further each day. The room breathes around it, walls expanding and contracting in rhythms that match the buzzing behind my eyes. The wooden floor has started to groan, but only when I'm not walking on it, only when I'm standing perfectly still, listening to sounds that come from somewhere deeper than the foundation. Objects move when I'm not watching. Coffee cups migrate to different tables. Books open themselves to pages filled with symbols that look almost like letters, almost like words, almost like instructions written in a language my mind refuses to translate. The pen in my hand writes things I don't remember thinking, messages to someone who might be me, who might be something else entirely. There were lights behind the trees, and they knew my name. The electrical outlets in my bedroom spark when I walk past, not dangerous sparks, but communications, tiny lightning bolts that spell out coordinates to places that don't exist on any map. The power company says there's nothing wrong with the wiring. They can't see what I see. They can't hear the conversations happening in the walls. My hands remember touching things my mind has forgotten. Surfaces that felt like liquid metal, textures that shouldn't exist in this world. The memory lives in my fingertips, in the way they tremble when I reach for anything that carries current. The sensation spreads up my arms sometimes, that feeling of touching something vast and aware and patient. The neighbor stopped asking about the gardening. Whatever grows in my backyard now reaches toward windows, toward power lines, toward anything that might carry its whispers further into the world. The leaves rustle without wind, creating sounds like distant conversations in frequencies just below human hearing. I water them without remembering, tend them in sleep, nurture something that was planted by hands I don't remember using. The door upstairs opens wider each night. Cool air flows down the stairs now, carrying sense of places that exist between seconds, between thoughts, between the spaces where memory ends and something else begins. The light that seeps through is wrong, too white, too knowing. It illuminates dust motes that move against gravity, that spell out words in languages that predate human speech. I've stopped trying to remember. Memory is protection, forgetting is mercy. Whatever happened in that field under those perfectly arranged stars, beside those figures without shadows, it continues happening. Present tense, ongoing, the part of me that stands there still, that never came back, that waters impossible plants and answers phones that ring with the breathing of something vast. The picture frame on the wall tilts at an angle that defies gravity. The room holds its breath, waiting for me to remember what I've chosen to forget. The drape sighs again, disturbed by presence that grows stronger each night, each dream, each moment when the buzzing behind my eyes grows loud enough to drown out the sound of my own heartbeat. The lights are moving closer to the house, story 8. I told them I hadn't gone nearby, that my route bypassed the entire block, keeping me away from any commotion. They accepted my words, moved to the next question. Yet the scent of damp earth still lingered on my boots, mingling with the crisp tang of rust. My cuffs, though hastily scrubbed, bore a stubborn smear. The wind had carried a distant murmur, too deliberate to be casual. The evening air stuck close, suffocating and humid. I didn't mention the marks on my hands. Or the figure I glimpsed in the shadows, the boots still left prints. But that was weeks ago, maybe months. The edges of that conversation have blurred, like watercolors bleeding into wet paper. What remains is this hollow feeling in my chest, as if someone reached inside and scooped out something essential. I know something happened. I can feel it in the way my reflection sometimes looks surprised to see me, in the way certain frequencies make my skin crawl. I've been different since then, not in ways others would notice. My coffee tastes the same, my routine's unchanged. But there's a weight behind my eyes now, a persistent ache that suggests missing pieces. Sometimes I catch myself mid-sentence, realizing I've been talking about something I don't remember experiencing. Other times I'll reach for a memory and find only static. The breakthrough came when I was cleaning out old files on my phone. Buried between grocery lists and voice reminders was an audio recording I didn't remember making. The timestamp meant nothing to me, but the file size was substantial. Nearly 47 minutes of something I'd apparently felt compelled to document. I hesitated before pressing play. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. Why would I record something and then forget about it entirely? The rational part of my mind suggested a pocket dial, an accidental activation. But the file name wasn't random characters. It was labeled evidence. The first few seconds were silence, then the rustle of fabric against the microphone. My own voice emerged, but strained, whisper-thin. I need to record this while I still can. Something's happening to my memory. I can feel it slipping away even as I speak. A pause, breathing that sounded too fast. The lights started flickering around sunset, not the normal kind of flicker. These were deliberate, like Morse code, but the pattern kept changing. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking now, and that familiar ache behind my eyes had intensified. I didn't remember speaking those words, but the voice was unmistakably mine. The tone, the inflection, even the slight catch when I'm nervous. I pressed play again. There's something outside. I can see the outline through the blinds, but when I look directly, it's gone. It's like trying to focus on a floater in your eye. The shape shifts when you're not paying attention. A longer pause, then a sound I couldn't identify. A low hum, almost electronic, but with an organic quality that made my skin prickle. The temperature dropped suddenly. I can see my breath now, even though the thermostat hasn't changed. And there's this smell, like new plastic and cold blood. I know that sounds impossible, but that's the only way I can describe it. The recording cut to static for several seconds. When my voice returned, it sounded more distant, as if I'd moved away from the microphone. It's inside now. I yanked the earbuds out, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence of my apartment felt oppressive, loaded with potential. I looked around, searching for any sign that something had been disturbed, any evidence of the event I'd apparently lived through but couldn't remember. That's when I noticed the window. The blinds were closed as they always were, but one slat was bent at an odd angle. Not broken, just twisted, as if something had pressed against it from the outside, or the inside. I approached slowly, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. When I adjusted the slat, peering through the gap, I saw nothing unusual. The street looked normal, empty in the way suburban streets always are. But as I watched, a street light began to flicker, not the steady on-off of a dying bulb, but in a pattern, deliberate, rhythmic. I backed away from the window, my skin crawling with recognition I couldn't place. The memory was there, just beneath the surface, like a word on the tip of my tongue. I could feel its shape, its weight, but couldn't quite grasp it. I returned to the recording, fast-forwarding through minutes of static and ambient noise. My voice emerged again, but different now. Calmer, too calm. I understand now. It's not trying to hurt me. It's trying to show me something. The patterns, the lights, even the smell, they're all part of a message. I just need to stop resisting and let it in. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't sound like myself anymore. The words were mine, but the cadence was wrong, the emphasis falling in strange places, like someone else was wearing my voice. It's beautiful, actually, the way the lights dance. They're forming shapes now, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly but make perfect sense in my peripheral vision. I think I'm supposed to follow them. The sound quality changed abruptly, as if I'd moved outside. I could hear wind, the distant hum of traffic, and underneath it all, that same electronic humming from before. But now it sounded almost musical, like a lullaby played on instruments that didn't quite exist. I'm walking now. The patterns are leading me somewhere. I should be scared, but I'm not. Everything feels inevitable, like this was always supposed to happen. Like I've been sleepwalking my whole life and I'm finally waking up. The recording went silent for so long I thought it had ended. Then, just as I was about to stop it, my voice returned one final time, but it was different again. Flatter, empty. I can see it now, what it really is, what it wants. I wish I could unsee it, but it's too late. It's already inside my head, rearranging things, moving memories around like furniture. Some things it's taking away entirely, others it's enhancing, making them more vivid than they ever were. A sound like breaking glass, then nothing. I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, the phone heavy in my hands. Outside, more streetlights had begun to flicker, their patterns spreading like a contagion down the block. I wanted to close the blinds completely, to shut out whatever was happening, but I found myself drawn to the window instead. The bent slat had straightened itself. I blinked hard, certain I was mistaken, but the blinds hung perfectly uniform now. No gaps, no twisted metal, as if they'd never been disturbed at all. That's when I noticed my reflection in the dark window. It was watching the street while I was looking at the blinds. For a moment, we were facing different directions entirely. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The bulb shattered, plunging that corner of the room into deeper shadow. But in the brief flare before it died, I saw something else in the reflection. A shape behind me, tall and impossibly thin, with angles that didn't make sense. When I spun around, nothing was there. I grabbed my phone and called the number I'd used to report whatever had happened weeks ago. The same calm voice answered, asked the same preliminary questions. But when I tried to explain about the recording, about the flickering lights and the reflection that moved independently, my words came out wrong. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, "just checking in, everything's normal here." I hadn't meant to say that. The words had emerged without my permission, smooth and reassuring. The person on the other end seemed satisfied, ended the call with a polite goodbye. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. Something was editing my words in real time, filtering out anything that might raise concerns. The same something that had stolen my memories, leaving only fragments and impressions. But the fragments were coming back now, triggered by the recording. Flashes of that lost evening began surfacing like debris after a shipwreck. I remembered walking, not outside my apartment, but somewhere else entirely. A place that felt familiar but looked wrong, as if the geometry had been subtly altered. The buildings leaned at impossible angles, their windows reflecting not the street but something else, something vast and dark and full of moving parts. I remembered the sound of my footsteps echoing strangely, as if the pavement was hollow underneath. And that smell, like new plastic and cold blood, growing stronger with each step. Most clearly, I remembered the moment I realized I wasn't alone. It hadn't been following me, it had been walking beside me all along, matching my pace perfectly. When I finally worked up the courage to look, it wasn't there, but I could see its reflection in every surface we passed: shop windows, puddles, the polished chrome of parked cars, always in my peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight. The memory fragmented there, dissolving into impressions and sensations, the feeling of being gently guided, of surrendering control. The gradual realization that I was no longer walking on familiar streets, but through spaces that existed in the gaps between places. And then at the end, the moment of perfect clarity, when it finally allowed me to see it directly, to understand what it was and what it wanted. The knowledge had been too much, too alien for my mind to process, so it had done me the kindness of taking that memory away, leaving only the edges, the safe parts. But the edges were sharp enough to cut. I found myself standing at the window again, though I didn't remember moving. The streetlights had stopped flickering, but now they cast shadows that fell upward instead of down. The shadows were dancing, forming those same geometric patterns I'd described in the recording. My reflection was gone entirely now. The window showed only the street, as if I'd become transparent. I pressed my hand against the glass, and for a moment I could see through my own flesh. My bones were visible in something else, something moving through my bloodstream, replacing it bit by bit. The phone buzzed in my other hand, a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for your cooperation. The integration is nearly complete. I wanted to throw the phone, to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only stand there, watching the shadows dance, feeling whatever was inside me spread through my nervous system like warm honey. Another memory surfaced, this one crystal clear. The moment in that impossible space when it had spoken to me without words, explaining its purpose with perfect, terrible clarity. How it moved between worlds, collecting experiences, cataloging consciousness. How it needed volunteers, willing participants who could serve as anchors in this reality. How it had been searching for someone like me for a very long time. The memory should have terrified me, but instead I felt a profound sense of peace. Everything made sense now. The missing time, the altered recordings, the way reality seemed to bend around me. I wasn't losing my mind. I was expanding it, making room for something larger than human understanding. The shadows on the street had formed a perfect spiral now, and I could see figures moving within the pattern. Other volunteers, other anchors, all of us connected by invisible threads of purpose. We were part of something beautiful, something that transcended the narrow boundaries of individual existence. My reflection returned to the window, but it was different now, enhanced. The eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, and when it smiled, I felt my own face mirror the expression without conscious thought. The recording had been a test, I realized, a way of measuring how much of the old me remained, how ready I was for the final phase. The fragments of memory, the growing unease, even the investigation itself, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to bring me to this moment of acceptance. I looked at my hands, and for just an instant I could see through them completely. See the intricate network of light that was replacing my circulatory system, the delicate machinery that was rewriting my neural pathways. The transformation was almost complete. Soon I would remember everything, not just the night I was chosen, but all the nights that came before, stretching back through countless realities. All the other versions of myself that had stood at windows just like this one, watching shadows dance in impossible directions. The phone buzzed again, another message. Welcome home. I set the device aside and pressed both palms against the window. The glass felt warm, almost alive, and I could sense something vast and patient waiting just beyond the barrier between worlds. Soon, that barrier would dissolve entirely, and I would step through into the spaces between spaces, carrying a piece of this reality with me. But first, there was one more thing to do, one final recording to make for the next version of myself who would wake up confused and hollow, searching for answers that were always just out of reach. I picked up the phone and began to speak, my voice calm and measured, already sounding less human than it had before. I need to record this while I still can. Something's happening to my memory. I can feel it slipping away even as I speak. The cycle would begin again as it always did, as it always would. And somewhere in the back of my expanding consciousness, I wondered if this was the first time I'd made this recording, or the 100th. The shadows continued their eternal dance, and I continued to watch, no longer certain where I ended and they began. Story 9. The echo of the wooden floor faded as I stepped back onto the carpet. The fibers brushed my skin like whispers, too light to be words yet heavy with intent. My fingers paused at the edge of the table, tracing the familiar grain that now felt foreign. The air stirred around me, carrying a scent that didn't belong. It was gone as quickly as it came, but I sensed a shift, as if the room itself had exhaled a secret. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe because the silence has become too loud, maybe because I need to put words to what can't be spoken. I've carried this weight for so long now that it's become part of me, like a second heartbeat beneath my ribs, but tonight feels different. Tonight feels like an ending. I should have told someone, should have reached out when it first started happening, but how do you explain something that exists in the spaces between thoughts? How do you describe the feeling of being watched by something that isn't there when you turn around? You have to understand I was normal once. I had routines. I drank coffee in the morning and watched the news. I complained about traffic and worried about bills. Simple things, human things, but that was before the room started breathing. It began with the carpet, those same fibers that whispered against my bare feet that first night. I'd walk across them and feel presence, not footsteps behind me, nothing so obvious, more like the memory of footsteps, the ghost of movement in a space that should have been empty. The scent came next, sweet but wrong, like flowers left too long in water. It would drift through my apartment at odd hours, usually when I was half asleep. I'd wake with my heart racing, searching for the source, but finding only the familiar smell of my own space. Coffee grounds, laundry detergent, the faint mustiness of old books. But underneath, always underneath, that other smell lingered. I started keeping a journal, tried to track the patterns, the times, the triggers, page after page of careful observations, as if logic could contain whatever was happening to me. The entries grew shorter as time passed, more fragmented. Sometimes I'd find words written in my handwriting that I didn't remember forming. They're closer now. The walls are listening. I can feel them in my sleep. I threw the journal away, but the thoughts remained, carved into the soft parts of my mind where reason couldn't reach them. The mirror in my bathroom started reflecting things that weren't quite right. Nothing dramatic, I still looked like myself, but my eyes seemed different, older, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of movement behind my reflection, but when I'd turn, nothing would be there except the shower curtain swaying slightly in still air. I stopped looking directly into mirrors after that, started brushing my teeth with my eyes closed, washing my face by feel alone. But I could sense my reflection watching me anyway, waiting for me to look back. Sleep became impossible, not because of nightmares, those would have been easier to dismiss. Instead, I'd lie in bed feeling the weight of attention pressing down on me, like being studied by something patient and vast and utterly alien. I'd keep my eyes shut tight, but behind my lids I could see shapes moving, gentle, flowing movements that felt almost like dancing. During the day, I'd catch glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, shadows that moved independently of their sources, curtains that billowed without wind, the sense of someone just leaving a room as I entered it, never enough to prove anything, never enough to convince anyone else. But enough to convince me I was losing my mind. I tried to tell my sister once, called her late at night when the presence felt particularly strong, but the words wouldn't come. How could they? She'd think I needed help, the kind of help that comes with pills and concerned conversations and worried glances. Maybe she would have been right. Instead, I made excuses, canceled plans, stopped answering calls. It was easier to be alone with whatever was happening than to pretend everything was normal when it so clearly wasn't. The isolation made everything worse, or maybe it made everything clearer. Without the distraction of other people, I could focus entirely on the subtle wrongness that had invaded my life. The way light fell differently in certain corners of my apartment. The way silence had texture now, thick and breathing. I started leaving offerings, food on the kitchen counter, water in small bowls. I don't know why it just felt right, like feeding something hungry that I couldn't see. The offerings were always gone by morning, though I never saw what took them, never heard anything move. But the presence felt satisfied, less restless. The air in my apartment grew calmer, though no less strange, like we'd reached some kind of understanding, whatever was there and I. That's when the changes really began. People stopped recognizing me, not all at once, that would have been too obvious, but gradually friends would look at me with confusion before their faces cleared. Coworkers would pause when they saw me, as if trying to remember my name. The mailman started checking the address twice before handing me packages. I began to fade, I think. Not physically, I could still see myself clearly enough, but something essential was being worn away, like erosion in reverse. Instead of being carved into sharper definition, I was becoming smooth, forgettable, generic. My reflection grew harder to focus on. Photos of me came out blurred even when everyone else was sharp. I tried to take selfies, but my face would be obscured by strange lights or shadows that hadn't been there when I pressed the button. The presence was taking something from me. Not violently, there was no malice in it, more like absorption, as if I was slowly being dissolved into something larger than myself. Something that existed in the spaces between things. I should have been terrified, part of me was, but there was also relief in it. The weight of being myself, of carrying all my small human concerns and fears and hopes. It was exhausting. To let go of that burden, to become part of something vast and patient and eternal. There was peace in the idea. But I'm still human enough to be frightened. Still human enough to write this letter, to leave some record of what I was before I become whatever I'm becoming. The carpet whispers more clearly now. I can almost understand what it's saying. The scent of wrong flowers fills my apartment constantly, and I've grown to love it. The presence doesn't feel separate from me anymore. It feels like coming home to a place I never knew I'd been missing. My sister called yesterday, or maybe it was last week. Time moves strangely now. She said she'd been thinking about someone but couldn't remember who. Asked if I knew what that meant. I wanted to tell her it was me she was forgetting, that I was dissolving like sugar in rain, but the words felt too heavy for my throat. Instead, I told her I loved her. She seemed confused by that, like she wasn't sure why a stranger would say such a thing. I think this is my last night as myself, whatever that means anymore. The presence is so close now I can feel it breathing with my lungs, seeing through my eyes. Soon there won't be enough of me left to maintain the pretense of separation. I'm not sure if this is death or birth or something else entirely, but I wanted to leave these words behind, proof that I existed, that I was real, that I mattered to someone once upon a time. If you find this letter, remember me. Remember that there was a person here who loved the smell of coffee in the morning and worried about ordinary things, who had a sister and friends and a life that felt solid and real. Remember me, because soon I won't be able to remember myself. The carpet is calling now. The room is breathing deeper. The presence that was separate from me is becoming the presence that is me. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready to come home. Story 10. I told them I didn't hear a thing. The room was still, a silent cocoon where the air felt too warm against my skin. Dust motes drifted lazily in the amber light that seeped through the blinds, casting stripes across the faded rug. A faint buzz lingered from a distant fan, masking the slight creak of floorboards settling. My hand brushed the old armchair, fingertips grazing something tacky, a residue that didn't belong. The scent of stale coffee mingled with a sharper, metallic tang that clung to the shadows. I glanced at the clock, its hands frozen in an impossible hour, but the tapping in my ears wouldn't stop. That's what I remember first, or think I remember. The edges blur when I try to focus, like staring at something underwater. They ask me questions afterward, their voices distant and muffled, but I couldn't give them what they wanted. The words felt wrong in my mouth, foreign syllables that belonged to someone else's story. I've been trying to piece it together ever since. Writing it down, speaking it aloud to the empty walls, hoping the fragments will align into something that makes sense. But memory is a broken mirror, reflecting pieces of truth alongside distortions I can't identify. The tapping, that's where it always starts when I close my eyes. Not loud, not urgent, just persistent. Tap, 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 like fingernails against glass, or maybe water dripping from a faucet somewhere in the walls. I can feel it in my teeth, in the hollow space behind my sternum. It follows me through the fragments, this sound that might not even be real. There was a hallway, long and narrow, with carpet that muffled my footsteps but couldn't silence the tapping. The walls were painted a color I can't name, something between yellow and green that made my stomach turn. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering in a rhythm that didn't match the tapping but somehow harmonized with it. One bulb was dark, creating a pool of shadow that I had to walk through. I remember the feeling of walking through that shadow. The temperature dropped just for a moment and the air tasted different, metallic, like sucking on a penny or breathing through a screen door. My skin prickled, every hair standing at attention, and I knew someone was watching me. But when I turned, the hallway stretched empty in both directions. Or maybe that was a different day, a different hallway. The fragments don't want to stay in order, sliding past each other like oil on water. Sometimes I think I'm remembering dreams, or dreams remembering me. The coffee was always cold. That detail surfaces again and again, sharp and certain. I'd lift the cup to my lips, expecting warmth, and the liquid would shock my tongue with its bitter chill. The mug was white ceramic with a hairline crack running from the rim to the handle. I traced that crack with my thumb while staring at something I can't quite recall. A window maybe, or a door. There was definitely a door, heavy wood painted white with a brass handle that turned too easily under my palm. I remember the weight of it, the way it swung open without resistance, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The tapping grew louder when I approached it, resonating through the frame like the door itself was hollow, filled with empty spaces where sound could echo and multiply. I never went through, or maybe I did, and that's the part I can't remember. The part that matters most, the missing piece around which all these fragments orbit like debris around a black hole. My hands shake when I try to write about the door. The pen skips across the paper, leaving broken lines that mirror the fractures in my memory. I set it down and flex my fingers, watching the tendons move beneath the skin. There are marks on my wrists, faint impressions that could be from anything. A watch worn too tight, rope, restraints. I don't remember taking off a watch. The taste of copper floods my mouth when I think too hard about the marks. It's the same taste that lingered in that room, the one with the amber light and the frozen clock. The same taste that accompanied the tapping, growing stronger when the sound grew louder, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or tasting it or feeling it pulse through my bloodstream. Sometimes I wake up and the taste is there, coating my tongue like I've been sucking on metal all night. I brush my teeth until my gums bleed, but it doesn't go away. It's part of me now, this flavor of something wrong, something that shouldn't be in my mouth but has made itself at home there. The person behind the door never showed their face. I know there was someone there because I could hear them breathing, a slow and deliberate rhythm that didn't match my own panicked gasps. They were waiting for something, or maybe I was the one waiting, standing in that hallway with my hand on the brass handle, frozen between opening and running. The breathing had a wetness to it, like air passing through liquid. It made me think of drowning, of lungs filling with something thicker than water. I wanted to call out to ask who was there, but my voice had abandoned me. The words stuck in my throat like insects in amber, preserved but useless. I remember light bleeding under the door. Not warm light, not the amber glow from the room with the clock, but something cold and blue, the color of deep water or winter sky. It pulsed in time with the breathing, growing brighter with each inhalation, dimming with each exhale. The light had weight to it, pressing against my eyes even through my closed lids. That's when the floor began to vibrate, subtle at first, like a truck passing on a distant highway, but growing stronger until I could feel it in my bones. The vibration traveled up through my feet, through my legs, settling in my chest where it matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Or maybe my heartbeat changed to match it. I can't be sure which came first. The coffee mug shattered. I remember that clearly, the white ceramic exploding against the floor in a starburst of fragments and cold liquid. But I don't remember dropping it. One moment it was in my hands, the next it was destroyed, and I was staring at the pieces like they held answers I couldn't read. One shard was larger than the rest, curved like a smile or a scar. I picked it up despite the danger, despite the sharp edges that bit into my palm. My reflection looked back at me from its surface, but wrong somehow, distorted. The face in the ceramic wasn't quite mine, though I couldn't identify what made it different. The blood from my palm mixed with the spilled coffee, creating swirls of red and brown that reminded me of something I'd rather forget. But forgetting is the problem, isn't it? I've forgotten too much already, and what remains are these jagged pieces that cut me every time I try to handle them. They asked if I remembered falling. I told them no, but that was a lie. I remember the sensation of falling without the impact, like dropping through space that has no bottom. The air rushed past my face, carrying scents of ozone and decay, and the tapping grew so loud it became a roar. But I never hit the ground, or if I did, that part is gone, erased by whatever happened in the darkness behind the door. The figure in the corner never moved. I know it was there because I could see it in my peripheral vision, a shape that belonged to a person but felt like something else entirely. When I turned to look directly, it would fade, becoming shadow or furniture or tricks of light. But the moment I looked away, it would return, patient and still and wrong. It had no face that I could see, just a suggestion of features that shifted when I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes it seemed tall, sometimes short, sometimes it barely existed at all, but it was always watching, always waiting for something I couldn't provide. The air grew thick when it was near. Breathing became work, each inhalation requiring effort, each exhalation leaving me dizzy and desperate. The metallic taste intensified until I could feel it coating my teeth, my tongue, the inside of my cheeks. I wanted to spit but couldn't, wanted to scream but had no voice. My reflection in the windows showed someone I didn't recognize. The face was mine but older, marked by experiences I couldn't recall. Lines around the eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, a tightness in the jaw that suggested grinding teeth and swallowed words. I touched my face and felt the changes, the subtle shifts that marked time's passage without my awareness. How long was I gone? That's what they wanted to know, but I couldn't tell them because I didn't know myself. The clock with frozen hands offered no answers, and my body felt both familiar and foreign, like clothing that almost fits but pulls in unexpected places. The tapping has been getting louder lately. It follows me through my days now, no longer confined to memory or dreams. I hear it in quiet moments, in the spaces between words, in the pause before sleep. It's calling me back to something I'm not sure I want to remember. But the fragments are aligning despite my resistance. The broken pieces are finding their edges, clicking together like puzzle pieces guided by invisible hands. The picture they're forming isn't one I want to see, but I can't stop looking. Can't stop trying to understand what happened in that room, behind that door, in the presence of that watching figure. The truth is rising like water in a well, dark and cold and inevitable. Soon it will reach the surface, and I'll have to face what I've been running from. The tapping knows this. It grows more insistent each day, reminding me that some doors once opened can never be closed again. I can feel it stirring now, the memory that contains all the others. It's close, so close I can taste its metallic breath on my tongue. The figure in the corner is becoming clearer, more solid, more real. And the tapping. The tapping has stopped. That's how I know it's time.